The First World War had just ended. In Europe, no country escaped its devastation. The human toll, of course, with about 20 million dead and 21 million wounded, was enough to put the world in mourning. The economic toll, with many countries facing shocking debt and damage, was almost as heavy. Even as Europe staggered under the weight of grief and ruin, the political world refused to quiet. New nations were forming, old empires crumbling, and unrest rose like smoke from the battlefield's ashes. Upheaval was in the air. Not the least among the changes were those seen by women, who had taken on male responsibilities in the workforce and done just fine, thank you. If there was any good that came out of the war, it was that it proved a turning point for women, energized about getting the vote and shaking off social mores that cast them as less than. But not all the post-war story was one of progress. Some women had never been treated as less than, particularly those who were rich, aristocratic, or royal. And by the 1920s, they, along with their equally privileged brothers and cousins, were at the center of a very different spectacle. This was just before things for that class began to truly fall apart. It was the 1920s, when trouble was brewing politically and economically, but not in the cafes and nightclubs of London, where a group dubbed the Bright Young Things was busy showing everyone what youth, money, and an absence of purpose looked like. These sons and daughters of the aristocracy were constantly in the spotlight, dashing about to be seen and photographed. They filled newspaper society pages, drinking to excess and debauching in equal portions, to the chagrin of their parents and the astonishment of others. Writer and historian Mark John Maguire, who studied history and philosophy in the UK before turning to a career as an author and artist, explored the phenomenon in his series They Got Away with Murder. He explained of the smart little moniker that it was coined by the press, and it was meant to depict a young, wealthy snob whose lack of apparent ambition, traditional morals, or any great talent was codified. To be fair, some of the bright young things would soon settle down to real lives and real achievements, but they were like the Kardashians when they were fresh into adulthood. Everywhere, envied by some, endured by others. Now, consider if the Kardashian sisters, when they got into their 30s, discovered that they had remarkable talent and that, when coupled with their notoriety, bloomed them into world-class, concert pianists. Because the Brights, who went on to bigger things, included photographer Cecil Beaton, actress Tallulah Bankhead, journalist and novelist Evelyn Waugh, brewery heir Brian Guinness, and romance novelist Barbara Cartland. Elizabeth Bowes Lyon, who would become the quite proper Queen Mother, was also linked with their social world. Others, like playwright Noel Coward, weren't strictly bright young things, but moved in overlapping circles, close enough that their work and wit helped define the same cultural moment. Not all went on to better things, though. The crowd also included the notorious Mitford sisters and Soviet spy Guy Burgess. And of course, not all bloomed. Take Elvira Mullens Barney, for instance. She did not bloom. She chose, instead, to kill a man. And, as history would show, she also killed the party they had all been living through. I'm Amber Hunt, and welcome to another episode of Crimes of the Centuries. Elvira Mullens was the middle child of John Ashley Mullens and Evelyn Maud Adamson. Her father was knighted in 1922. He was already the financial consultant to His Majesty George V and the leader of the British world exchange markets. In short, the British stock market was Sir John Mullens to move. The family lived in Knightsbridge at 6 Belgrave Square, a residence that easily accommodated their 20-plus servants. Their neighbors were equally posh, filled with nobility and titled families. Elvira's mother was a noted socialite who may have overindulged her daughters after the death of her oldest child, a son named Cyril, who died when the girls were not yet teenagers. That overindulgence may explain why Elvira was not interested in learning, contributing, or accomplishing much of anything. Here's a rather harsh description of her by Peter Coates, writing in his 1974 book, The Trial of Elvira Barney. Quote, "It is doubtful that Elvira Barney ever thought about what anybody, irrespective of class, thought of anything or anybody. She seems to have believed that her riches meant that she could afford to be selfish. She wanted her own way and was usually able to get it. To marry well was her only duty, but she seemed disinterested in duty of any kind. Her younger sister, Avril, made up for that lack by marrying 3 times. First, when she was just 16, to George Imerentinsky, a Russian prince who had been part of the king's Grenadier Guards. Much later, she would marry shipping executive Ernest Aldridge Simpson. You may better know him as the second husband of Wallis Simpson, the woman for whom a king forsook the throne. Anyway, back to Elvira, who played the field. The prevailing opinion of her at the time was that she was not well suited to the white glove life, too loud, too gaudy, too rowdy, despite having been born into it. She was a vapid partier, one of many chronicled by London newspapers and magazines. With her dramatic personality and her renowned auburn-haired beauty, Elvira, just 20 years old, thought about becoming an actress. She enrolled at the Lady Benson Drama Academy and even landed a small part in a play that opened in 1925 and lasted for about 140 performances. On stage, she used the name Dolores Ashley, a name she would never use again. But she found even that kind of work really wasn't to her liking. She reversed course on the marriage idea. According to Michael Buchanan Dunn, host of the Murder Mile UK true crime podcast, Elvira had her own way of complying. He described her as this.
Elvira saw herself as the rebel and the troublemaker. Like a petulant child, Elvira went out of her way to do everything her parents despised.
This is from Murder Mile's 250th episode, to which the generous Buchanan Dunn said, "I could help myself."
In 1924, Elvira got engaged to Charles Graves, a gossip journalist whose articles about the bright young things had established them as cultural icons, as opposed to being just privileged wastrels. These two were seen as the hot young couple. Only it was Elvira's bizarre behavior which ended their tempestuous relationship.
Bizarre is a nice way to describe what happened. It seems Elvira showed up at Graves' home on Saturday night around 3 a.m. Awakened by a guest, Charles was told a girl was walking up and down the pavement in front of the house and that she was waving a revolver and talking loudly to herself. Graves, then an editor of the Sunday Express, told his guest to stay put while he boldly went outside, confronted Elvira, and took away her loaded gun. He did not report the matter to the police, nor did the incident warrant so much as a squib in his own paper, which may have been an effort to protect himself. There were rumors that, yes, Elvira had gotten a little out of hand, but that she'd had a good reason. She'd caught her fiancé in bed with a man. Later, when Graves wrote his autobiography, he refrained from naming either Elvira or his guest that night. He moved on. She found she liked cocaine. In something like a meet-cute, Elvira became enchanted by one of the singers who was performing at a party at her parents' home. John Sterling Barney was one of a trio known as the Three New Yorkers, who usually played venues like the Kit Kat Club and the Ballroom at the Waldorf Astoria. Her decision to wed him was, according to Scottish actor Paul Brody of Well I Never, much to the chagrin of Lord Ashley, who was furious Elvira had eschewed the eligible bachelors of the aristocracy for the mediocre American tenor. That's a quote. So no big to-do at St. Margaret's at Westminster Abbey, the 12th century Gothic cathedral where the likes of John Milton and Winston Churchill and Elvira's sister took their vows. Instead, Elvira and John Barney tied the knot at the Prince's Row Register Office. As Peter Coates dryly noted, quote, "In comparison to St. Margaret's Westminster, the venue suggests that the Mullenses questioned whether it was a fair exchange to lose Elvira as a daughter and gain John Sterling Barney as a son," end quote. It hardly mattered. The August 1928 marriage didn't last through Christmas, with Elvira telling everyone that Barney was physically and mentally abusive. He went back to his native soil, and they agreed they'd sort out the divorce later. The next few years, 1929, 1930, 1931, were rocky for her, as they were for most everyone else on the planet. The Great Depression hit hard. Economies were tanking. Yet, the bright young things crowd carried on as if insulated from the collapse, sleeping in, dressing for drinks, lingering over long dinners, dancing and cavorting as though the world weren't hanging by a thread. Elvira leaned on her addictions to soothe her failed marriage and to fuel her decline. In 1930, she was arrested after a speeding car crash in Croydon. Belligerent and entitled, she berated the police officer who had dared to arrest her. She reportedly asked him, "How dare you arrest the daughter of a knight?" It was that era's version of, "Don't you know who I am?" A year later, she crashed another car, this one in Piccadilly. She broke her jaw, forcing her to retreat to Paris to heal. That's where she met Thomas William Scott Stephen, a handsome young man 4 years her junior. He was a failed banker turned self-described dress designer, known to his friends simply as Michael. Not sure how that worked, but Michael, both the name and the fellow, stuck around. He too had grown up in comfort, though he didn't breathe quite the same rarefied air that Elvira had. Solidly middle class, Michael's father was a bank manager, his mother a physical education teacher. He was taught the value of hard work, but never seemed to fully absorb the lesson. As a young adult, he drifted. He gambled, he drank. Contemporaries whispered that he might have been a well-kept gigolo. He was certainly fond of cocaine and may have even dealt it on the side. He borrowed money liberally, especially from women, and had no visible source of income. Did I mention that he was good-looking? Still, by 1930, he was the lone ne'er-do-well in the family. One of his brothers had become a solicitor, and another was the managing director of the Daily Telegraph. He met Elvira while they were both tramping through the London nights, and soon they were entwined. It is now that Elvira, who had been living unhappily with her parents, who seemed to have some misguided expectations of decorum from her, decided she'd get herself a little pied-à-terre in William Mews' Lowndes Square, SW1. Here she could keep the hours she wanted and entertain as she pleased. This was a decided step down in living arrangements for Elvira, but it wasn't exactly slumming. The structures along the Mews had been built originally as stables for the big and elegant houses of London's elite. They were now occupied by chauffeurs and coachmen and their working families. People in the Mews got up early and they went to bed before the evening meal was being served at the Ritz. It was a quiet enough place. That is, until Elvira and Michael arrived, shouting at each other in the middle of the night and waking everyone around them. Michael Buchanan Dunn again.
As the hipsters of their day, they loved to brag about how they lived among the real people. And yet, they didn't know their names, their jobs, and sullied the cul-de-sac's peace with late-night parties and fights.
I've heard it said that a rich man is not a poor man with money. They're different. They play by rules the rest of us can only guess at. This doesn't make them better in any way, just different. And in some cases, it does make them worse. Now, I know I've made Elvira and Michael out to be largely unlikable, unmotivated, and incurious, people who figured they were owed something in life that they did not have to work for. But I can't find much evidence otherwise. I've looked. I mean, they sound like maybe they were once fun and engaging, but that wore thin fast, especially when the glittery crowd around them were, judging by the names above, anything but idle, anything but dull. As Peter Coates summed it up, quote, "If Stephen appeared more worthless than Elvira, it was only because she was rich and he was not," end quote. Soon they would dominate headlines in London and most everywhere else. And choosing who to root for wouldn't be easy. Michael Stephen had made himself at home in their small 4-room apartment at 21 William Mews, which had originally been a garage. He had free access to Elvira's bank account, which was regularly replenished by the allowance her father felt obliged to give her. While the amount of that annual gift is unknown, it's recorded that Sir John gave her sister Avril, the one with the royal title, £4,000 a year, or in excess of £335,000 annually if you were to spend it today. So, yeah, plenty. Later, there would be much discussion about Elvira and Michael's sex life. A lot would be danced around in print as it was 1932, but a lot was not. Both Elvira and Michael were known to have bisexual liaisons. Whether they got vicarious thrills from taunting each other over that, or if they watched, or if they willingly participated in any kind of group sex, is left to speculation. But accounts strongly suggest their relationship was highly sexualized and often performative. As Coates put it, quote, "What we do know from subsequent disclosures is that much of the fighting and screaming that went on between them was intended to whet the appetite of each partner in what was a perverse sexual relationship. But however odd their liaison, there is no doubt of Michael's contentment in being kept and Elvira's contentment in keeping him," end quote. So it was that on May 19th, 1932, Michael went out without Elvira to gamble and carouse. Why he left her behind at home is anyone's guess. Still, when he returned by way of a taxi cab around 3:30 a.m., he yelled up to her window to say, to the whole neighborhood really, that he had no money on him and he needed to pay the cabbie. Neighbors would later report that she appeared at their upper floor window naked and told him to go fish for it. He left in the cab but returned later on foot. More shouting ensued. Elvira appeared at the window again, this time with a revolver in hand. Then, shrieking, "Laugh, baby, laugh for the last time," she took 2 shots at him but missed both times. Michael slept that night in a greengrocer's van left in the street. But as always, he returned and the couple reconciled. This was not the first time the revolver had been involved in one of their dust-ups. Police would later note bullet holes in the walls of the Mews flat. No one reported these incidents to police, nor did they report the shots that rang out on the cobblestones outside. 11 days later, on May 30th, 1932, the couple slept until noon and had a late lunch in the West End where they, as always, drank more than they ate. They were recovering from yet another night of excess and already planning that evening's pre-party, the prelude to London's Monday night revelry. Such nights were exceedingly common. Everyone knew how the night would progress. But first, Elvira and Michael were playing host to about 30 people who began arriving around 6. The guests were served ice-cold gin and appetizers. It was all accompanied by loud jazz and raucous laughter that everyone in the neighborhood could hear as it was a warm summer night and all of number 21's windows were open. Neighbors remembered tension between Elvira and Michael. She was said to be upset that he had taken money from another woman, one who enjoyed watching him lose it at the gaming tables. Still, the pre-party had gone well enough. Unlike other nights, no one called the police. Because, see, they would call the cops if the noise got bothersome, but they didn't bother to call the cops if the complaint centered around, say, gunfire. Go figure. Anyway, by 10 p.m., the party had wound down, and Elvira and Michael headed out with their friend Arthur Jeffress to the swanky Café de Paris. The club had opened in 1924 and quickly became one of London's most glamorous supper venues. Silent film star Louise Brooks introduced the Charleston there to rapturous audiences, while Marlene Dietrich held court in the 1930s. The Prince of Wales was a regular, often seen mingling with Cole Porter. Discretion was the house policy and its greatest draw. Elvira and Michael were regulars. After the threesome had dined, they went to the Blue Angel Club for more drinks and random frivolity. Jeffress left around 2. He would later say that the couple was set to leave after him, and they seemed happy enough. Around 4:40 a.m., Elvira Barney placed a frantic call to the home of her family's longtime physician, Dr. Thomas Durant. Freshly awake, he recognized Elvira's voice, saying that there had been a terrible accident at her home. Accounts differ on how much time it took Durant to get there. Some say it took more than an hour. Others report it was more like 90 minutes. Elvira did make a second call to the house to ask his wife what the holdup was. In any case, the doctor answered her call. Here's how writer Mark John McGuire described the scene in Murder in the Mews. When Dr. Thomas Durant finally arrived at Elvira's house around 6 that morning, he found a young man sprawled at the top of the stairs with a revolver nearby. Michael had been shot in the chest. Elvira, hysterical, insisted it had all been a terrible accident. Later, Durant testified that Elvira kept saying that he should have arrived sooner, as Michael had wanted, quote, to see you, to tell you it was only an accident, end quote. Durant said Elvira keened over Michael's lifeless body, kissing his brow and saying over and over that he was not dead. The doctor called the police, who arrived around 7. Detective Inspector William Winter, accompanied by a sergeant and some others on scene, began questioning Elvira, the doctor, and neighbors who might have heard anything. Inside the small flat, a highly distraught Elvira explained that she and Michael had gone to bed but got into an argument. He left their bed, threatened to leave her for good, and started to get dressed. Elvira said that she always had a gun in the house and that Michael decided to retrieve it, to take it with him. He got it and walked into the hall and into the bathroom at the top of the stairs. She went after him. She wanted to wrest the gun away from him, she said. In the struggle for possession, the gun must have gone off. She said she didn't realize it had fired but saw Michael go into the bathroom. Some time elapsed before she realized he was hurt. That's when she called the doctor to come to his aid. Michael had lived long enough to say a few things to her before he expired, especially that bit about wanting to talk to Durant to absolve her of any guilt. Convenient. The police decided it was time to take Elvira to the station for further questioning. This did not go over well.
She struck Sergeant Campion across the face, wailing, "How dare you threaten to put me in a cell, you vile swine?" Which he hadn't. Having to be restrained, with the police informing her mother, Lady Mullens, of the arrest. She barked, "Now you know who my mother is. You will be a little more careful in what you say to me."
This was Elvira, remembering her place and what she assumed was theirs. Oddly enough, none of the officers called out her behavior. Still, it was anybody's guess if they bought her story. Within a few hours of being hauled to the station, Elvira had given several statements, all basically the same. They were straightforward enough, if perhaps lacking in some honesty in a few areas. Specifically, while she admitted she was married but living apart from her estranged husband, she said she and Michael Scott Stephen were, and I'm quoting from one of her statements here, great friends, and he used to come and see me from time to time. She added that when they went out, quote, he always used to see me home, end quote. The previous night, she said, was no exception. She admitted they had quarreled about a woman Michael was fond of. Hinting that she might have been suicidal, Elvira said that Michael found her revolver under a cushion on a chair in the bedroom and took it, as he was afraid she might harm herself. She then told police that she had run after him to get the gun back and that they had struggled in the doorway of the spare room, as they were fighting for control of the weapon, and went off. Quote, our hands were together, his hands in mine, for a few minutes. I did not think anything had happened. It seemed quite all right. I did not think anything serious. He went into the bathroom and half shut the door." End quote. At some point, he urged her to call a doctor. She opened the door, saw that he looked ill, and made the call. She said no one answered, so she checked again and found him sitting on the floor, looking worse. She called the doctor again and asked for him to come around quickly. Michael, she reiterated, had asked, "Why does the doctor not come? I want to tell him what has happened. It was not your fault." She said she put a towel on his chest, re-rang the doctor to make sure he was on the way, and returned to find Michael dead. The last line of her statement read, quote, "Stephen and I had quarreled on previous occasions, but not often," end quote. For the moment, police seemed satisfied. She was released to her parents, who took her home. Sedated, she slept. Back at William Mews, police gathered more statements. They tracked down Arthur Jeffress and another friend who had seen the couple while out clubbing that night. The glittering set kept mostly silent, preferring to steer clear of scandal. But working-class neighbors had plenty to say, to police and to the press. Several reported hearing the couple shouting. 3 said they distinctly heard Elvira cry, "I will shoot you." One neighbor said she heard 2 shots. Another swore it was 4 or 5. The autopsy was underway, and the love hut, as Elvira called the flat, was being scoured for evidence of more bullets. Investigators found a second mark in the bedroom wall. They also found something else. When police searched Elvira's flat, they reported finding books and objects they thought looked more suited to a brothel than a respectable home in 1931. By the time the afternoon newspapers were out, all of London was up to speed.
The Manchester Guardian, June 1st, 1932. West End shooting tragedy. Man found dead in flat. A shooting tragedy in the West End of London was being investigated by the police yesterday, mostly after 4 a.m. Yesterday, Michael Scott Stephen, son of Mr. T.M. Stephen, London manager of the North of Scotland Bank, Lotbury, London.
That's Ange, no last name I could find, reading the archived copy of the day's news in her YouTube episode, The Tragedy of Elvira Barney. Ange also cited the Daily Herald of London's June 1st edition, which added a bit of spicy gossip to the unfolding drama. It gives details of Michael's death, but it also mentions Elvira's sister's marriage to a bona fide Russian prince.
The wedding took place at St. Margaret's, Westminster, and was one of the biggest social events in 1925. A day or two ago, the princess went into a London nursing home for an eye operation. She is progressing satisfactorily, but the news of the tragedy is being kept from her.
In a classic case of bearing the lead, the Herald also quoted Michael's father as saying, "I suppose these things are inevitable." It was one of the few things his family contributed to the record. To them, Michael's death seemed almost like the natural outcome of a life without purpose or point. Still, awfully harsh for a man to be dismissed by his family so coldly when he died at just 26. By now, well-regarded pathologist Bernard Spilsbury had had time to look into Michael's fatal wound. Here's McGuire detailing Spilsbury's remarks.
Death had been caused by hemorrhage due to bleeding from the lung. The bullet had entered the chest horizontally and narrowly missed the top of the heart. He said death would have occurred no more than 10 minutes after the shot had been fired. He also said that it was not impossible, but extremely unlikely for the shooting to have been accidental. The absence of singe marks to the sleeves or hands of the deceased suggested that his hands had not been anywhere near the revolver when it was fired.
Police and prosecutors needed a second opinion on the latter. They called Robert Churchill, renowned London gunsmith and nephew of Sir Winston. This Churchill had also gone down in history. He's known for his creation of the field of forensic ballistics, having developed the comparator microscope, which allows 2 bullets to be examined side by side to determine if they had come from the same weapon. Robert Churchill, too, was confident. The revolver found near Michael could not have been fired by him. 3 days after the shooting, Elvira was arrested and charged with murder. Her parents, though disapproving of her lifestyle, hustled to retain two of the country's finest legal minds to defend her. So it was that Walter Frampton, then considered the most able criminal defense barrister of the day, and Sir Patrick Hastings, former Attorney General and one of the most formidable courtroom advocates in the country, set out to prove Elvira blameless. Hastings was hesitant to accept the case. He only agreed after his wife reminded him that their family nanny had once cared for Elvira as well. The Mullens and the Hastings were from the same privileged class. One of their own couldn't be left to hang. That didn't mean Hastings thought it would be a cakewalk, though. By 1932, the public was decidedly less enchanted by the rich, titled, and entitled. The Depression was biting hard, unemployment and poverty were rampant, and across Europe there were rumbles of political unrest. Against that backdrop, two spoiled socialites cavorting through it all seemed grotesque. Hastings noted in his own autobiography, Cases in Court, that his initial encounter with his client was concerning. Quote, "My first view of Mrs. Barney was slightly depressing. Her appearance was not calculated to move the heart of a jury. Indeed, she was a melancholy and somewhat depressing figure as she stood in the dock with a wardress on each side of her." End quote. His further description of her seemed to confirm that, while she was once quite the beauty, the years, the drugs, the alcohol, and the late nights had taken their toll. He found her bleak and charmless. Still, Hastings knew his strategy. He would not directly challenge Spilsbury or Churchill, whose reputations were untouchable, but he would chip away at interpretation. He needed to cast the ear witness testimony as confused and unreliable. He needed to transform the shouted phrase, "I will shoot you," into the more ambiguous, "I will shoot," aligning with Elvira's claim that she had been suicidal. The crux of Hastings' strategy was simple: convince the jury that this wasn't a murder at all. He argued that Elvira had been suicidal and that in the chaos of that night, Michael may have fired the gun himself, either in a clumsy attempt to stop her or in the heat of their struggle over the weapon. In other words, if Michael's own finger had been on the trigger, then the fatal shot could not be pinned squarely on Elvira. He also spotted a glaring police blunder. Officers had failed to seize the revolver immediately to check for fingerprints on the trigger. By the time they did, the only clear print belonged to one of the detectives. And Hastings knew one more thing. He would have to put Elvira on the stand. She was no sympathetic figure, but jurors needed to hear her voice. If they couldn't like her, Hastings at least needed to keep them from hating her. That was no small task. Justice was swift back in the day. Elvira and her accusers were ready. Her trial opened on July 4th, 1932. Justice Travers Humphreys presided, and Sir Percival Clark appeared for the Crown. It was realized early on that the trial would be a public spectacle of the first order. A wide array of journalists came. Papers even dispatched women's pages reporters to clock Elvira's outfits every day of the proceedings. It was set at the Central Criminal Court of England and Wales, commonly known as the Old Bailey, and it marked the first time in the court's history that seats in the courtroom were available by allocation. This meant that, aside from those already given permission to attend, less than 40 spots remained for the public. The demand was so overwhelming that some people showed up very early or slept in front of the courthouse to get the seats, which they could later resell to the highest bidder. And in many cases, the highest bidders were London barristers who wanted to see the two great men, Hastings and Clark, battle it out. It was not considered bad form for celebrities and society types to show up as well. They, too, wanted to get a good look at Elvira Barney brought low.
The Daily Mirror likened it to a theatrical first night rather than to a trial. that fashionable and titled were out in force to see the trial of one of their own.
On that first day, Elvira left her provocative clothing in her closet, settling on a simple but expensive black and white dress and a black cloche hat encircled with a wreath of camellias. She carried white gloves. I told you the women's page writers were there. Now her parents held their heads high as they walked through the main entrance, over which there was this inscription: "Defend the children of the poor and punish the wrongdoer." The trial began with the Crown laying down the facts of where and when the crime had occurred. Then came the parade of witnesses that Hastings had to befuddle. The first neighbor testified that he heard Elvira say she was going to shoot. She had said it twice. He said he then heard the shot, and then he heard Michael cry out, "What have you done?" He then said he heard Elvira scream, "Chicken, chicken, come back to me. I will do anything I can for you." There was then, he said, about 15 minutes of silence. Hastings, during cross, ignored the silence and asked the witness if he knew that Elvira's pet name for Michael was Mickey. He suggested that the witness had misheard, mistaking chicken for Mickey. The witness held firm. Hastings wasn't having it. He said, "If you're wrong about that, mightn't you also be wrong about other things you heard?" The witness didn't change his answer. Other neighbors repeated similar stories, though some said they heard Michael, Michael before the "come back, I love you." Dr. Durant took the stand next, describing Michael's wounds. Hastings seized the moment to highlight Elvira's devotion at the scene, her weeping, kissing the body, begging for help. He asked whether Durant thought her grief had seemed genuine. Durant replied that he believed it had. Then came Sir Bernard Spilsbury. As Peter Coates wrote, Spilsbury testified that the revolver, quote, had a long and heavy pull and was impossible to discharge if pointed at the left side of the chest of the person holding it, end quote. He added, quote, with the wrist bent as it must be bent, I could not get enough power to charge the pistol off at all, end quote. Robert Churchill followed and agreed. The gun, he said, could not have been fired by Michael himself. But then Hastings asked to examine the revolver. In a theatrical flourish, he fired it repeatedly at the ceiling to show the trigger wasn't impossibly stiff. He asked Churchill whether pulling the trigger without firing might rotate the cylinder. Churchill admitted it could. Hastings then posed the key hypothetical. If one person had a finger on the trigger and another grabbed that hand in a struggle, might the weapon discharge? After a pause, Churchill said yes. Hastings drove it home, quote, when the finger, not of the person killed, is on the trigger, end quote. Another pause. Churchill, yes. It was too soon to know if he had planted enough doubt. When Elvira herself took the stand, she surprised many. She testified, calmly, that the second bullet hole in her flat had come from another day. She recounted the night's events as she had told Durand. When she reached the moment of the shot, Hastings interrupted with his careful questions. Have you ever, in your life, desired to shoot Michael Stephen? Never, she said. Has there ever been in your life anybody you were fonder of than Michael Stephen? No, she said. Did you shoot him that night? No. When it was Sir Percival Clark's turn, he argued that jealousy had been her motive, jealousy of another woman who gave Michael money. Elvira countered that they only quarreled about money. The other woman, she said, was no rival in love, but a bad influence, an enabler of Michael's recklessness. She painted herself as the one trying to save him. And so it went. When the two legendary barristers summed up their cases for the jury, it was Hastings' closing argument that would be remembered, quoted, termed as among the best ever given. The judge even told the jury so before he instructed them. The jury only took 2 hours to say Elvira wasn't guilty, though later she would have to pay a fine of £50 for illegally possessing a gun. The everyday men on that jury had done as Hastings had asked. They had ignored the experts and the witnesses. They had chosen to believe the woman whose own life made a mockery of theirs. There was a lot of talk in certain circles that Prosecutor Clark had thrown the case, that he didn't like what it said about his class of people or his own children's lives. The examples given to bolster this claim are pretty convincing that he, at least, handled Elvira with kid gloves. Elvira was free, but hardly chastened. She went back to her old life, the worse for wear. One night, soon after her acquittal, again at the Café de Paris, she reportedly got on top of a table and yelled out, "I am the one who shot her lover, so take a good look at me." But the bright young things were as good as done for. Their era of privilege and parties had curdled, and Elvira Barney was proof of two truths. They had never been admirable, and money could still tilt the scales of justice. Michael Stephen, vilified every day of the trial, was never rehabilitated in the public eye. Elvira fared little better. Her divorce from John Sterling Barney was finalized in 1933. By that time, her family had given up on her and hardly acknowledged her existence. She moved to Paris, drifting in the same type of hard-drinking, drug-tinged set. There's a story that one day, barreling the wrong way down a French road, she took a curve too quickly and barely missed having a head-on collision that surely would have killed the man driving the oncoming vehicle. That driver was said to have been Sir Patrick Hastings, the very man who had saved her life. On Christmas night, 1936, after a night of her usual overindulgences, she had to be helped to bed by a hotel porter. The next morning, she was found, half on the bed and half off, still fully dressed in her fine clothes, her expensive jewelry, and her furs, dead. She was 32 years old.